My boss forced me to train a new employee while recovering from surgery because business doesn't stop for personal issues. I was in agony, but I kept going. After my boss left, the newbie pulled me aside and quietly said. The chair groaned when I shifted, and I bit down on the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since they'd cut into me, and here I was, hunched over a desk that wasn't ergonomic on my best day, feeling the incision pull every time I reached for the mouse. So this is your login, I said, keeping my voice steady. Capital T, lowercase everything else, then the numbers they assigned you. The new guy, Marcus, 24, fresh out of some business program, nodded slowly. He had that look people get when they're not really listening, when they're just waiting for their turn to talk. Got it, he said, but his eyes kept drifting to the door behind us. I understood. Everyone in this office watched doors. Watched who came through them and when. My abdomen cramped, a deep muscular spasm that made me grip the edge of the desk. I'd been told not to sit for extended periods. I'd been told to avoid stress. I'd been told a lot of things by a surgeon who clearly had never met Gerald Huffman. You okay? Marcus asked, and for a second, I thought maybe this one was different. Fine. I pulled up the inventory system, the screen casting that particular shade of blue that meant 8 more hours of fluorescent purgatory. This is where you'll spend most of your time. We track everything through here, shipments, returns, damaged goods. The office door swung open behind us. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The cologne hit first, that aggressive cedar and something that Gerald seemed to bathe in. Then the footsteps, always a little too heavy, a little too deliberate. How's the training coming along? Marcus straightened in his chair. I couldn't, really, without making it obvious that straightening was currently beyond my physical capabilities. Good, I said. We're going through the system. Gerald moved around to where he could see both our faces. He was smiling, but Gerald's smiles never reached anywhere near his eyes. 53 years old, regional manager for 11 years, and absolutely convinced that his position was the result of merit rather than his college roommate being the VP's nephew. Good. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. I felt the incision site scream. I knew you could handle it. That's why you're my go-to, right? Marcus glanced at me. I saw something flicker across his face, concern, maybe, or confusion. Right, I said. Business doesn't stop, you know? Gerald was still smiling, still pressing down on my shoulder like he was trying to stake a claim. I told Patricia the same thing when she had her whole situation. Life happens. But the work happens too. Patricia had been out for 2 days after her father died. 2 days. I remember, I said. Gerald finally released my shoulder. Anyway, Marcus here is going to be a great addition. I can feel it. You just get him up to speed, and we'll have you back to your regular duties in no time. He checked his watch, a gesture I'd seen him perform approximately 10,000 times. I've got a call with corporate in 20. You two keep at it. He left. The door didn't slam. Gerald never slammed doors, but the click of the latch felt final somehow. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, are you sure you're okay? You look kind of gray. I'm fine. I pulled up the next screen. This is the vendor portal. You'll need to. I heard about your surgery, he said. I mean, Karen mentioned it when I was filling out my paperwork. She said you were supposed to be out for 6 weeks. 4, I corrected, though he was right. And plans change. Did they? Or did someone change them for you? I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't like the other new hires Gerald brought in, the eager ones, the ones who laughed at Gerald's jokes and competed to see who could stay latest. Marcus had something else behind his eyes. Something watchful. The vendor portal, I said again. You'll need to check this every morning. He nodded, but he was still looking at me like he was trying to solve something. I should probably explain how we got here. I'd been with Dayton Logistics for 9 years. 9 years of showing up early and staying late, of covering shifts when people quit without notice, of training every new hire Gerald dragged through those doors. I knew the systems better than the people who designed them. I knew which vendors were reliable and which ones would short you on a shipment if they thought they could get away with it. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, though after 9 years in logistics, I sometimes wondered about the literal version too. Gerald had been my boss for 7 of those years. In the beginning, he'd been almost tolerable. Not good, never good, but tolerable in that way bad bosses can be when you're young enough to believe that hard work eventually gets rewarded. I'd watched him take credit for my ideas in meetings. I'd watched him promote people who'd been there half as long as me because they golfed with him or because their wives knew his wife. I'd watched him construct an entire mythology around his own competence while the rest of us did the actual work. The surgery was supposed to be routine. Gallbladder. They'd told me it was minimally invasive, told me I'd be back on my feet in a week or 2. What they didn't tell me was that minimally invasive still meant cutting through muscle and tissue, still meant internal trauma, still meant weeks of healing that my body would demand whether my boss approved or not. I'd submitted the paperwork 2 months in advance. Short-term disability, medical leave, the whole thing. HR had approved it. My doctor had signed off. Everything was in order. Then Gerald called me the night before my surgery. "Here's the thing," he'd said. And I'd known from those 3 words that nothing good was coming. "We've got a new hire starting, and you're the only one who really knows the systems well enough to train him." "I'll be out for 6 weeks, I'd reminded him. "That's what the paperwork says." Right, but here's the thing. There it was again, that phrase he used when he was about to ask the impossible. Business doesn't stop, you know? And Marcus is a great kid, real sharp, but he needs someone who can really show him the ropes. There's Karen. Or David. They both know the systems. Not like you do. Come on, you know that. What I knew was that Karen had once told Gerald his quarterly report had a calculation error, and he'd never forgiven her for it. What I knew was that David had turned down an invitation to Gerald's 4th of July barbecue and had been on thin ice ever since. "I'm having surgery," I'd said. "My doctor says 6 weeks minimum." 2 weeks, Gerald countered. "Come back after 2 weeks, just for the training. You can take it easy once Marcus is up to speed." Gerald. "Look, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. You're my go-to. You know that." I'd said no. I'd said no clearly and firmly, the way you're supposed to when someone asks you to do something that might literally damage your body. I'd hung up feeling almost good about it. Then the surgery happened. And recovery was harder than they'd said. More pain, more exhaustion, more of that bone-deep weariness that makes you wonder if you'll ever feel normal again. And on day 15, when I was still shuffling around my apartment like an old man, barely able to sit up without wincing, Gerald called again. "HR mentioned you're not coming back for another 3 weeks. That's what the paperwork says. Here's the thing." And this time, he didn't ask. He told me that Marcus was struggling without proper training, that Karen was too busy to help, that David wasn't detail-oriented enough. He told me that if I cared about my job, if I valued my position at all, I'd understand that sometimes we all have to make sacrifices. "Business doesn't stop for personal issues," he said. "You know that." I'd like to say I told him off. I'd like to say I called HR, filed a complaint, done something. But I was exhausted and drugged and alone in my apartment, and Gerald had a way of making you feel like your legitimate medical needs were actually personal failures. So I came back. 2.5 weeks after someone had cut me open, I put on clothes that fit poorly over my bandages and drove to an office where the chairs were too hard and the hours were too long and my boss thought medical leave was just a suggestion. That first day back was the worst. Not because of the pain, though the pain was constant, a throbbing reminder that my body was far from healed, but because of how normal everyone acted. Like there was nothing strange about me being there. Like I hadn't just had surgery. Like Gerald hadn't essentially threatened my job to get me back. Karen gave me a look when I walked in. She knew. You could see it in her eyes, that mixture of sympathy and resignation that came from working for Gerald Huffman. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, when Gerald was out of earshot. "I know. You could file a complaint. This has to violate something." "Probably." But we both knew how that would go. Gerald had been there 11 years. He had connections. He had the ear of people who mattered. And I was just the inventory specialist who knew too much about shipping schedules and not enough about corporate politics. Marcus started the next day. He was younger than I'd expected, with that particular kind of confidence that came from never having been truly humbled by life. He shook my hand too firmly, not realizing that any sudden movement made me want to scream, and told me he was excited to learn from the best. Gerald must have told him that. Another one of Gerald's moves, building you up to your face while undermining you everywhere else. "Let's start with the basics," I'd said, lowering myself into my chair with the kind of careful deliberation usually reserved for bomb disposal. The days blurred together. Wake up, take the pills that barely touch the pain, drive to work, train Marcus, go home, collapse, repeat. My incision site wept sometimes, a thin discharge that the surgeon had warned might happen if I pushed too hard. I pushed too hard every single day. Marcus was smarter than I'd given him credit for. He picked things up quickly, asked good questions, didn't need to be told the same thing twice. But he also watched Gerald, the other employees, me. Especially me. I'd catch him looking at me sometimes with that same expression he'd had on the first day, like he was working through a problem he couldn't quite solve. Gerald, meanwhile, was in his element. He'd swing by our desk 2 or 3 times a day, always with that smile, always with a hand on my shoulder that sent fire through my nervous system. "How's my dream team doing?" "Great," I'd say, because what else was there to say? "See, I knew you could handle it. That's why you're the best." The best? The go-to. The one person Gerald could count on to sacrifice their health for his convenience. I was starting to understand what those titles actually meant. By day 4, I was running a fever. Low grade. The kind that makes you feel like you're wrapped in wet cotton, but I kept coming in. By day 6, I noticed the skin around my incision was redder than it should have been. By day 8, I was taking twice the recommended dose of over-the-counter painkillers just to make it through the afternoon. My follow-up appointment with the surgeon was supposed to be on day 10. I rescheduled it because Gerald had a meeting with a vendor that morning and really needed me there to answer technical questions. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. Gerald answered maybe 2 questions himself. I answered the rest, hunched in a chair that felt like it was made of broken glass, while the vendor, a woman named Linda who'd been doing this longer than Gerald had been alive, kept shooting me concerned looks. "You feeling okay?" she asked me afterward, when Gerald had stepped out to take a call. "Just recovering from surgery," I said. "I'll be fine." She didn't look convinced. Neither was I. It was day 12, 12 days of training Marcus, 12 days of Gerald's shoulder pats and business doesn't stop philosophy, when everything shifted. Gerald had left early that day. Some kind of golf thing, though he called it a client development opportunity in the email to HR. The office felt different without him there, lighter somehow, like we could all breathe a little deeper. Marcus and I had been going through the quarterly reporting system, one of the more complex parts of the job. He'd been quieter than usual, more focused, but I'd chalked that up to the difficulty of the material. Then, around 4:30, when most of the office had emptied out, he turned to me. "Can we talk for a second?" "Sure. What's up?" He glanced around, checking that we were alone. "Not here. The break room?" I followed him, my body protesting every step. The break room was empty, as it usually was this time of day, just a couple of vending machines, a table that had seen better decades, and the faint smell of burnt coffee that never quite went away. Marcus closed the door behind us. Then he did something I didn't expect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I probably should have told you sooner, but I wanted to see how bad it actually was first." I looked at the card. It was simple, white, with a name and a title that made my stomach drop. Marcus Reeves. Field Investigator. Regional Labor Relations Board. "I'm not really a new hire," he said. "I mean, I am on paper, that's how these things work. But I'm here because someone filed a complaint about this office 6 months ago. Working conditions, retaliation, management practices. The whole thing." I sat down, not because I wanted to but because my legs suddenly didn't feel reliable. "Who filed it?" "I can't tell you that. But I can tell you that what I've seen in the last 12 days has been..." He shook his head. "I've done a lot of these investigations. What Gerald is doing to you. This is bad. Really bad. Forcing you back from medical leave, pressuring you to work while you're clearly unwell, the constant physical contact that you obviously can't refuse." "He's my boss," I said. "He asks, I do it. That's how it works." "That's not how it's supposed to work." Marcus leaned against the vending machine, arms crossed. "I've been documenting everything. The times he touched your shoulder when you flinched. The meeting with the vendor that should have been covered under your medical leave. The conversations Karen and David have had about being afraid to speak up. It's all going into my report." I didn't say anything for a long moment. My head was spinning, and not entirely from the fever I still hadn't gotten properly checked. "What happens now?" "Now I finish my investigation. Another week or 2. Then I submit my findings, and the board decides how to proceed." He paused. "But I wanted you to know. Because you're hurting, and you've been hurting this whole time, and you deserve to know that someone sees it." I thought about 9 years. 9 years of early mornings and late nights, of giving everything I had to a job that had never quite given anything back. I thought about the incision site that still hadn't healed properly, about the fever that kept creeping back, about the way Gerald smiled when he said business doesn't stop. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Right now, nothing. Just keep doing what you're doing." He hesitated. "But if you wanted to file your own complaint, on the record, with documentation, it would strengthen the case, significantly." I looked at the business card again. Such a small thing. Such a simple thing. But it felt like a door opening somewhere, a door I hadn't even known existed. "I'll think about it," I said. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the pain, though the pain was always there, like a houseguest who'd overstayed their welcome, but because I couldn't stop thinking about what Marcus had told me. Someone had filed a complaint 6 months ago. That meant someone else had seen what I'd seen, had felt what I'd felt, had finally worked up the courage to say something. I kept running through the list of people who'd left over the years: Patricia, who'd quit 3 months after her father died; Tom, who'd been let go for performance issues that everyone knew were actually about him refusing to cover Gerald's mistakes; Sandra, who'd simply stopped showing up one day and never explained why. Any of them could have been the one. All of them probably should have been. I thought about my own years there. The things I'd overlooked, the times I'd kept my head down, the moments when I could have spoken up and didn't. I told myself it was just how things worked, that every job had its Gerald, that the devil you knew was better than the devil you didn't. But lying there in the dark, feeling my incision throb with every heartbeat, I realized something. I'd been so busy surviving Gerald Huffman that I'd never stopped to ask myself what, exactly, I was surviving for. The next morning, I called my doctor's office and rescheduled my follow-up for that afternoon. Then I called my lawyer, not a friend, exactly, but someone I'd used years ago for a minor dispute that had never gone anywhere. I told her I needed to talk about something work-related. How soon? She asked. As soon as possible. The follow-up with my surgeon was not good news. The incision was mildly infected, nothing catastrophic, but definitely something that wouldn't have happened if I'd been resting like I was supposed to. He put me on antibiotics and told me, in no uncertain terms, that I needed to stay home for at least another week. I'm serious, he said, and there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. You're risking complications that could land you in the hospital. Whatever's keeping you at work, it's not worth this. I told him he was right. I didn't tell him about Marcus or the investigation or the door that had started to open in my mind. My lawyer, her name was Helen, and she had the kind of pragmatic sharpness that came from 20 years of dealing with corporate bullshit, listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You have documentation of all this? She finally asked. Some, emails from Gerald about coming back early. Text messages. The original medical leave paperwork. I paused. And apparently, there's already an investigation happening. A field investigator from the labor board has been at the office for the last 2 weeks. Helen's eyebrows rose. That was the most emotion I'd ever seen from her. That changes things. How? If there's already an active investigation, anything you file becomes part of a larger pattern. It's not just one disgruntled employee, it's documented, ongoing misconduct. She tapped her pen against her desk. Tell me more about this investigator. Marcus, you said? I told her everything. The business card, the documentation, the offer to file my own complaint. She listened, nodded, made notes. Here's what I'd recommend, she said when I'd finished. Go home, rest. Let the antibiotics work. But while you're doing that, write everything down. Every incident you can remember, every time Gerald pressured you or made you feel like your job was at risk. Dates, times, witnesses if possible. Then we'll file a formal complaint with the labor board, coordinated with the existing investigation. And then? And then we see what happens. She leaned back in her chair. But I'll tell you this, if even half of what you've told me is true, Gerald Huffman is going to have a very bad year. I didn't go back to the office for 2 weeks. Gerald called 3 times the first day, each message more irritated than the last. I thought we had an understanding, he said in the third one. I need you here. Marcus still needs training. I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemails to Helen, who added them to the growing file of documentation. Marcus checked in via text, a number he'd given me, separate from the office directory. Just so you know, he wrote on day 3 of my absence. Gerald told everyone you're out with personal issues. Karen looked like she wanted to murder him. How's the investigation going? I asked. Can't discuss specifics. But it's going. On day 8, Helen called with news. The board accepted your complaint, she said. It's been merged with the existing investigation. They're expanding the scope. What does that mean? It means they're not just looking at how Gerald treated you anymore. They're looking at how he's treated everyone. Past and present employees. Patterns of behavior. The whole picture. I thought about Patricia, about Tom, about Sandra. About all the people who'd passed through that office and come out the other side a little more broken than they'd been before. Good, I said. When I finally went back, it was different. Not better, exactly. Gerald was still Gerald, still smiling that smile that never reached his eyes, but different. I noticed things I hadn't before. The way he avoided eye contact with me. The way he stopped putting his hand on my shoulder. The way he announced, in an all-staff meeting, that the company was reviewing its policies around medical leave to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations. Karen caught my eye during that announcement. She didn't smile, but something in her expression suggested she knew more than she was saying. Marcus finished his training a week later. On his last day, his official last day, anyway, he shook my hand again. This time, he was careful about it. It was good working with you, he said. Likewise. He lowered his voice. You'll be hearing from the board soon. I submitted my report yesterday. I nodded. Thanks for telling me. About everything. Thanks for being willing to listen. He glanced around the office one last time. Some people, you know, they see what's happening to them and they just accept it. They convince themselves it's normal. You didn't do that. I almost did, I admitted. Almost doesn't count. He left. I went back to my desk and stared at the inventory system for a long time, thinking about almosts. The report came 3 weeks later. 37 pages, single-spaced, documenting violations ranging from improper interference with medical leave to creating a hostile work environment to what the board called systematic retaliation against employees who raised concerns. Gerald was named 23 times. HR got the report on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Gerald was on administrative leave pending review. By the following Monday, he was gone. I found out from Karen, who found out from David, who'd heard it from someone in the legal department. There was no announcement, no all-staff meeting, no explanation. One day Gerald's office was full of his golf memorabilia and pictures of himself shaking hands with various executives, and the next day it was empty. They walked him out yesterday, Karen told me, her voice carefully neutral. Someone said there might be lawsuits. Multiple employees. Past employees too. I thought about Patricia again. About Tom and Sandra and everyone else. Good, I said. The settlement came 6 months later. I can't discuss the specifics, there are agreements I signed, things I'm not allowed to say, but I can tell you that it was enough. Enough to cover my medical bills, enough to make up for the wages I should have received during my actual medical leave, enough to feel like something approximating justice. More importantly, the company changed. Not overnight, and not perfectly, but it changed. They hired a new regional manager, a woman named Denise who actually asked people how they were doing and seemed to mean it. They rewrote the medical leave policies. They created a hotline for reporting management issues. Small things, maybe, but small things that would have made a difference to me, once. I stayed for another year, partly because I wanted to see if the changes would stick and partly because I didn't know how to leave something I'd given so much of myself to. In the end, though, I did leave. Took another job, one with better hours and a boss who wouldn't dream of calling me the night before surgery to demand I come back early. The incision scar healed eventually. You can barely see it now, just a thin white line that only shows up when I've been in the sun too long. Sometimes I run my fingers over it without thinking, remembering those weeks when every movement was agony and the only thing that kept me going was the knowledge that someone, somewhere, was paying attention. Gerald, I heard, tried to get another management position at a competitor. He didn't get it. Apparently, these things follow you. I think about Marcus sometimes, the investigator who pretended to be a new hire, who watched and documented and finally gave me a reason to believe that speaking up mattered. I never saw him again after that last day, but I like to think he's out there somewhere, walking into another office, shaking someone's hand too firmly, getting ready to ask the questions that need asking. Business doesn't stop, Gerald used to say. He was wrong about that too.